Welcome to Curious Coaching, the Sport Northern Ireland podcast for coaches who are driven to explore new ways, thirsty for new ideas, and passionately curious about how they can maximise the power of sport through great coaching. The podcast that seeks not to answer coaching questions, but to provoke them.
Hello and welcome to the Curious Coaching Podcast with your hosts Michael Cook and myself, Simon Toole. In this episode, it's a little bit different for us than normal in that we are focusing on a theme within coaching rather than an individual coach themselves, though we're really delighted to be joined by three people who have made a big contribution to the development of coaches and as coaches themselves as well. So today we're going to be exploring women in coaching and some of the challenges that have resulted in us having fewer women in coaching than we would really like to have. Today our three guests are Elaine Rice, former Northern Ireland netball senior team coach, currently community coach in Crumlin with the netball club she helped establish there, as well as a PE lecturer at St Mary's College Belfast. We have Tandy-Jane Haughey, who's a senior lecturer in coaching and sports development at Ulster University, and also in the past made significant contribution to the coaching system in Northern Ireland, supporting governing bodies and also working for the lead organisation for coaching in Northern Ireland when it was in place. And lastly, but by no means least, really pleased to have Lucy Moore, Sport England Head of Professional Workforce, also a coach developer and a hockey coach, which makes you really good in my book, just for that last bit in particular. You're really welcome, and I'll hand across to Michael to get us started.
To echo what Simon said there, you're very welcome. We're delighted to have all three of you on. And I just want to kick off a little bit around your journey into coaching. I'm really curious about how that started and how you've been involved in coaching since. So could you give us a little bit of a breakdown in terms of that coaching journey for you? Elaine, would you be able to kick us off, please?
Yeah, well, I grew up playing a lot of netball, and then when I came to Belfast to do my teacher training at St Mary's, I was playing for Belfast Ladies, and there was a lack of junior players coming through. So myself and Claire Rose McGuinness set up a junior club there. After a while, we got a wee bit of success with it. We started both coaching representative underage groups. I was assistant coach for the Northern Ireland Universities team, and then the head coach got sick, and we managed to win the British University Games. So I got elevated up to head coach of it before being asked to take on the Northern Ireland senior job.
Fantastic. So quite a wide range of experience there, starting from the university sector and from the club sector, moving into international coaching at that point.
And now back to the children again.
Brilliant. Fantastic. And same question to you, Lucy.
Yeah, so I was always a sporty kid, and I loved playing football when I was a small child. But then when I went to secondary school, football wasn't for girls, so I got into hockey because it's a similar thing with a stick. And for as long as I can remember, I suppose I've been bossing other kids around and organising people. And then my teachers decided that would turn into a career in coaching. So I qualified officially as a coach when I was 16 and just went from there really. So I've coached a variety of adults and kids and a little bit of player pathway stuff over here in England, but my passion really is beginners, like whether they're adult beginners or little people. That's where it's the most fun.
And that's where we know it's really important that youngsters get a really good start in terms of falling in love with sport for the long term.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, thank you for that, Lucy. And Tandy, same question to you.
Thanks, Michael. I think for myself, I came from a slightly different background because I had the opportunity of doing dance and gymnastics from a young age, looking at development of myself from a fundamental perspective. Did a wee bit of swimming, and then whenever I went into big school, I should say primary school as well, I was a bit like Lucy. I played football, and I always remember that I kept getting told off, and I used to get the meter stick every day because you were supposed to be back in the classroom when the bell went for lunch, and of course I was always late back into the class with the boys, so I was always caught on for playing football with the fellas. When I moved into an all-girls grammar school, the traditional sport was netball, and that's where I started to be involved in netball. I actually didn't start playing until I was 14. And I had the opportunity then to go on and go into a club setting where I was playing with quite older ladies at that particular point in time. So it was starting Cumber Phoenix at that point. We had sort of no real coach at one point, and because I had the passion for wanting to develop myself in the area of coaching, I got the role of being coach and player and umpire at that point, which was very difficult because of the older generation and the respect then sometimes as a player and being a particular coach. That passion for coaching stemmed into becoming a gymnastic coach as well. So I worked in a community setting within gymnastics as well as netball. And that led me on to where I am now in regards to sort of more coach education rather than specifically coaching myself. However, I am involved in overviewing and seeing a lot of coaches in different sports. And I think that's where the challenge is sometimes is for us to know exactly what we should be looking for in assistant coaches along their journey and along their path.
Fantastic, Tandy, and interesting to note that you've coached in a number of different sports. And as you quite rightly say, your role right now does involve understanding where coaches apply their skills in a wide range of sports. So that's useful insight.
Yeah, so I think what we wanted to really do with the podcast today was, I suppose, to offer people who are listening some thoughts and ideas about actually how can we change the current diversity of the workforce in terms of gender, to be more representative of the people who actually play sport and more representative of the population as a whole in an ideal world. And we know that 25 or 30% of the workforce in Northern Ireland, the coaching workforce, are female, and I know the stats might be higher in other places. And we get into the performance coaching workforce, it even gets smaller, and we're down to maybe 10% odd who are working with athletes who are likely to be at the Olympics. And so we wanted to explore that a little bit today, and some of the challenges with that, but definitely some of the solutions. And we're really conscious of not wanting to get into them, but not wanting to get stuck on old stereotypes. And I think your three backgrounds totally take us away from those right for a start, because you've all got into coaching at a relatively early age and come through the quite similar coaching journeys to Michael's and mine, I think, from Soundswork. So we're really conscious of not wanting to do that. One thing this year that to me did try and blow some of that stuff apart, Lucy, was your blog of where all the female coaches. So I just wondered if we would maybe start with you, and you could maybe talk us through some of the key things that you were really trying to get across through that blog.
Yeah, sure. So firstly, thank you. That's very kind of you to say. I guess where it came from is that, a bit like you guys, I was involved in lots of conversations at work about why aren't there more women in coaching? Why don't we have broader diversity of coaches? And it's something that we've been talking about for a really long time. There've been all sorts of women's coaching initiatives, women's coaching programs going for a long time, and yet the picture still remains quite stubborn, particularly when you get into talent pathways and high performance. So in England, our stats are probably a bit different to yours. That actually, when you look at people being coached, it's almost half and half, men and women delivering at this baseline community level. So we've got lots of people who are interested and get started in coaching as women, but then as you start to get into the qualifications, it goes off a cliff. And then you start to go into talent pathways, and even more so, it gets worse. And then when you get into high performance, the numbers fall even more dramatically. So actually there's something going on, whether it's structural, whether it's to do with the access to qualifications, whether it's to do with the perceptions of what a good coach is or what the role requires. There's something bigger than a lack of confidence or women not wanting to do it, because they are there doing something. So that's, I guess, where my thinking started. And then I suppose I had more conversations and more interaction with more coaches, and it sort of started to feel a bit like if you went to the doctors and you had a rash on your arm, you get cream for the rash. But if you didn't tell them about all your other symptoms, the problem would never go away. And that's kind of the way we've approached it. So for me, a lack of women in coaching is actually the symptom of a much bigger, more complex problem. It's not the problem. So yes, helping women to get more confident, putting on women's only programs, mentoring, sponsorship schemes, all of those stuff is helpful. But unless we start to look at the bigger, wider issues that are going on, we'll never make it go away. You know, a lack of women is not the only challenge that we have. We also have a real lack of ethnic diversity in the coaching workforce in England. We really don't know how many disabled coaches that we have, even within parasports, you know. So this is a symptom of a bigger problem when it comes to a lack of diversity. And the other thing for me was that there's a big stereotype, and I don't know whether it's the same for you guys, that women are seen as nurturing and warm and fluffy, and so therefore are great with kids. And so when we do interventions, often it's, oh, we need a more nurturing style, we've got to get a woman. And that in itself is not true. There are plenty of men who can fulfill that role. But these are sort of the traps, which then prohibits women from going into high performance. And so when you start to unpick it, there's more and more and more to this. And it starts to present itself less as a women versus men thing and more of like a coaching thing. Like, this is a thing with sports coaching that we need to get amongst and unpick. So I guess that's where the article came from. I think it's still something I'm throwing around and talking to people, and I haven't got really any answers. But it was interesting. I was listening to something the other day. A lady called Alice Eagle. She works in business a lot, and she was saying that actually concepts like the glass ceiling are not that helpful, because it makes the idea that the problem's at the top. And actually, when you look at women's progression in sports coaching, the challenges and barriers are all the way along. So it's even things like those kind of concepts that we need to look at. Is it a glass ceiling? Is it the problem, the transition from being talent into high performance? Or are there other ones? You know, there are probably other ones, and what are they and why are they there? So as a whistle stop, I guess that's the brain dump of what my article says and where it came from.
No, brilliant. It's definitely worth having a read. I know we'll share the link in the session to this blog. It's definitely worth having a read of as well if you're listening to this. Thanks for that, Lucy. I think that paints a really, really good opening picture for us and gives us somewhere to move from. So I know obviously Elaine and Tandy both develop coaches within the Northern Ireland setting. So Elaine, I'm going to come to you because I suppose you've see that of coaches coming through and all the students that you're working with and things, but also I suppose Lucy's point around some of the high performance stuff, and you've obviously coached Commonwealth Games and things like that as well, World Cups. So just wondered if you had any views.
There was so much in Lucy's blog that I maybe hadn't considered before, in that I prepare coaches, but I don't really look at the barriers. It's more about the instruction and what they're doing, and maybe it's a poorness on my part that I haven't really looked at the background to it before. One thing that really resonated was that people are a bit afraid of making the mistakes, and females are maybe a bit more wary of that. And I think that we need to recognise that no coach is infallible, and as long as the athletes feel cared for and looked after, and not to take away from the nurturing part, because I do think that is part of being a coach as well, that you do care for them. In Northern Ireland, we definitely have the same issues when I look at the sheer numbers of female coaches, and that I would be hard pushed to name any really outside of netball. Gymnastics and dance, yes, but in terms of team sports and a lot of my experiences obviously in that area, there's definitely a gap that needs explored and investigated and work out what we need to do in Northern Ireland. And to me, Northern Ireland is quite a unique place, and it has to be bespoke to us. We can learn lessons from England sport and that, but whatever we do needs to come from a Northern Ireland perspective. And I, for one, having read the blog now, will reflect on what I'm doing here to make sure that I can be part of the solution.
No, definitely. And funny. Recently, one of the trainees at our outdoor centre, Effie, she had written a blog for us, which was around. I think she titled it "Hands Up" in the end, because she'd basically gone from thinking she needed to deliver perfect sessions to understanding that the people who were the people she looked up to were the people who reflected most on their mistakes and learned most from their mistakes. And she talks in that blog about just a complete change of mindset. So it sort of builds on some of the reasons or some of the things that you're highlighting there, Elaine, as you say, for both male and female coaches. Tandy, can I maybe bring you in now? Any views on the context here, Tandy?
Yeah, I know, because I read Lucy's blog as well, and because of my involvement with the Female Sports Forum and the Active Fit and Sporty project, I was challenging myself to think about, yes, we have had individual intervention programs, but they have been with purpose, Lucy, and I think that's the thing to say. Yes, sometimes they do work, but it comes down to then the understanding of the purpose and the purpose of having those type of intervention programs. And I went back and just read through some of the findings, because we have done some focus groups with those who have been involved in those particular projects. And one of the things that resonated was the fact that they felt because they had a free space and a space to communicate effectively with one another. And one of the key things that someone had indicated, that they felt that they could lean into the rumbles. And I think that was a really lovely thing to say, that they could lean into the rumbles, that they could really challenge themselves to think about the negativity sometimes they do have within their particular environments, and maybe the struggle they have getting their thoughts and opinions across. And I further looked at that, and I thought about some of the other bits in regard to some of the other programs, like the Engage Her program that runs through Sported, here in Northern Ireland, and is now in the UK as well, and the learning that has come from that, and the importance of learning that we have. Even thinking about, all that academic stuff in terms of theory of planned behaviour, that's exactly what we need to look at, when we are taking into consideration some of the work that we do on the ground. That we have the willingness to change, but it's thinking about the male counterparts that we have, and sometimes that is the struggle, that maybe we're not seen as being as valued as other males in that sometimes male dominated environment. But it's having that understanding, that positive attitude, and to acknowledge ourselves that we do a good job, and when we aren't doing a good job, to acknowledge that as well, that sometimes we have to think and reflect upon ourselves, and say, what can we do to change? And for me, whenever I was reading your blog, I was going, what can I do whenever I'm delivering within my particular setting to make sure that I have effectiveness across not just the females that I'm working with, but also the male counterparts too, and that we challenge each other to make sure that we're breaking down those subjective norms that we have, and normalising that a coach is a coach in whatever environment you're actually in. If it's a male environment or a female environment, a disability environment, socioeconomic, community environment, whatever, you need to have the skill set and developing that skill set, and stuff that we would have done years ago, Simon, in terms of that high performing coach. What is it? The particular skill set you need is, good communicator, good observational skills, have an understanding of the environment you're actually in, and contextualize that, and understand what you need to do for change to happen.
No, thanks, Tandy, and that sort of segues us really nicely actually into nearly where we were going to go with some of the questions today, because what we did do was we took a look at some of the literature in the area to try and stop thinking and start knowing about what we were doing a little bit. And when we did the literature review, it really tied back to some of the things. There was a lot of synergy, I think, between what we pulled out of that and some of the thoughts that Lucy had put down on paper within the blog as well. So we sort of distilled like 4 main themes out of those, and we really wanted to unpack those with you guys today, with a view to try and see what could we do about that. We know what some of the issues and challenges are. We know what the workforce roughly looks like at the minute, but what could we do about it? How could we take it forward? So for that, I know we leaned on the research of Professor Leanne Norman at Leeds Beckett quite a bit. But even Michael and I were chatting just before we started to record, and we were saying actually Sarah Milner at UK Coaching was another person who actually really helped us to better understand how we need to look at this, and helped us evolve our thinking a little bit from we need women-only coaching programs to we need to change the coaching programs so that everybody can get involved in those. So that's nearly, I think, how we've evolved our thinking a little bit, and we've certainly got a long way to go still, but that's how we've got to where we've got to. But yeah, as I say, Tandy, really nice segue across to Michael, and I know, Michael, you're going to pick up on the first of those barriers or walls, as we've described them.
Yeah, definitely. And just before we go into that, I think it was a really interesting point that Lucy had made about we don't have all the answers right now. And I think that makes it even more important to keep having the conversation and keep having the dialogue, so we can address a range of issues that are quite wide-ranging. So the first theme that came out of that review was really around culture. And we know that culture is often underpinned by or it's potentially seen as how we do things around here, and how that then relates into females in coaching. And there may be elements like stereotypes, which we've talked about. There may be elements like conscious or unconscious bias. And I suppose my question to all three of you, how can we create positive change here? And I'll go to Elaine first, if you're okay with that, Elaine.
Yeah, that's fine. First of all, I think it's important to notice that some of it is very deliberate bias, that there's maybe people with issue with regard to their ego and their male ego being a bit challenged whenever a strong female comes into play. But like, I can just talk personally in that as a mother of three, I was frequently questioned about how could I afford to be away from my children, and I felt disapproved of on many occasions, and in terms of working full-time, coaching and being a parent, it's all very, very tiring. And just having a support system in place, and I mean both family and friend support, but the average male coach doesn't have those issues. They do have the support, they do have an acknowledgement of their contribution and a public acceptance, which accepts, that allows them to do their role. In order for us to create positive change, I think we're a long way off that happening. As I say, as a mother of three children, I could only do it in blocks. I couldn't keep doing it. So in order for it to happen, Sport and I need to continue the work they are doing in promoting female sports and coaches. And I think it's really important to have these conversations and get it out there. And then demanding it from their national governing bodies too, that, it's not a tick and box exercise. This is something, if you want to develop your sport, then you need to develop your coaching base. And this is the way that we recommend that you do it, and make the governing bodies accountable to it.
Absolutely. I think that's a really good point in terms of the organisations that are responsible for developing sport. See it as something that it's totally embedded, and it's not just a bolt-on or something that's a tick box exercise, I think, as you described. And I agree. I think it has to be central to anything that we do. Elaine, thank you for that. Over to Tandy. Tandy, same question. How do you feel we can create positive change in relation to culture?
Well, it's funny actually, because that's what some of our master students are actually doing at the moment. That's a critical part of their work. And it's a challenge for everybody to even just to focus on what does culture actually mean. And then when we consider that word culture, it comes down to the who, the what, the why, the where, when, all of that, coming down to your coaching philosophy and the importance of understanding your coaching philosophy, and where does that actually stem from? Understanding really your values and your beliefs, and a lot of the time that's entrenched in people in regards to their identity and the culture of their particular sport. And then when we come down sort of like to the coach education element of it, and the factor of you coach the way that you are taught within your coach education programs, and there's a real challenge if you've got an innovative and creative individual who may want to change how that coaching system is being developed and being run. And that's a challenge, if you're thinking from a female perspective, trying to deliver on some male-dominated sports. You may not have the knowledge and skills, the knowledge, the technical and tactical knowledge of that particular sport, but you've got the pedagogical knowledge of what should be being delivered and how to deliver. So it's thinking outside the box, being critical, thinking about those experience triggers that you have, and reflecting upon those experience triggers within your particular culture, wanting and challenging yourself to make those changes, that you're not going to be coaching and doing things that you have been coached, because things have changed, and we have to acknowledge that, and the cultural shift needs to happen from our national governing bodies, and I think some are changing, some it's going to take a longer period of time to change. Things aren't going to change overnight. It could take 10 years before we actually see particular cultural change. And if you think about your document now in terms of that DNA, what is our DNA, and understanding that. And for females, we have a DNA, males have a DNA, but when you're thinking about coaching, everybody should have quite a similar DNA, because your purpose is you want to have learning to happen within your sessions, and learning for the individuals that you're working with.
Absolutely, and within any given culture, there's going to be cultural norms, and if we look at those critically, we'll say, well, actually, are those cultural norms positive towards a diverse coaching workforce, or are they negative? And that's something we need to consider. And over to you, Lucy. Then, have you got any thoughts on how we might create positive change?
Yes, but Tandy and Elaine have given really good summaries, and Tandy said it earlier, actually you said it in the answer as well, that it's about having a purpose. For me, it is an amazing coach. What do we need to change about our environment to get Elaine in, rather than how do we make Elaine fit our environment? We want to have the best coaches, and if all of our coaches look exactly the same and have exactly the same background, there's a strong chance that we haven't actually got the best people for the job. This is a competitive advantage. You wouldn't do it in another sector. And, I think we have a bit of a culture of, well, we advertised and no women came forward. Obviously, we'd appoint the best person on the day, but they didn't come forward. And so it's looking at things like, how do we recruit, even at a club level, a coach for the under 15s? You start getting into the perception of what is a coach for the under 15s. But actually, you broke down, what is the job you need doing? What is the kind of person you're looking for? How are you advertising it? I think we have a bit of a culture where a volunteer takes on 20 million jobs and then he retires, and you say, oh, does anybody want to take over from Bob? He works, every night of the week and both days on a weekend. Does anybody want to step in and fill Bob's shoes? And the chances are no. And if they do, it might be another Bob who's also, retired and wants to. So it's we make it unappealing, and we need to think about just the simple steps of how are we going to find people? How are we selling this job? What's it like when you get there? Are you expected to be perfect? Are you expected to do all the admin? Or, are you coming in to be part of an environment, a team? And again, it isn't really a men-women thing. It's just, I think, as Elaine said, that the system has been constructed in such a way that if you are a woman and you do have a family or other commitments, that it is disproportionately harder for you to fit into the mold of the traditional be there every single day type coaching role. So it's having that purpose and really being true to it, that the reason we want this diversity isn't just for the sake of diversity, it's because we genuinely want the best person for the job, and in order to do that we might have to change the way we do things around here.
Absolutely.
Michael, can I just step in there, because just what Lucy's actually said there about the volunteers, I think that was a key thing with some bits that have happened with the Engager project, and even from a netball club perspective, national governing body perspective, that the volunteers to the ground, they were afraid to let go, and females sometimes are afraid to let go, and things not to be done the way that they should be done. And it's taken stock of, there are other people around you who'd be more than willing to do, but it's how you approach that, and not be frightened to let go sometimes, and for others to take over. It's about working together in that particular club setting, more effectively than having, so thinking about that leadership and the importance of having good leadership across is critical.
And certainly one of the things that we'll talk about in a few minutes is really around how we recruit. coaches into the workforce. And I think that's really important, and that's been touched on a fair bit here. Simon's going to pick up now in terms of the second barrier, which really focuses around coach education and development.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. I know we sort of talked about this quite early on and nearly in the intro around coach education, and one of the biggest barriers potentially, which is ironic when we're talking to three people who work in coach development and develop coaches for a living, but is that we don't have enough people at the front of the room who look at, like, the female coaches would come in, potentially being one of the barriers. Or two, we don't have the right proportion necessarily of female coach educators. That seems to really contribute to some of the challenges around this. And our way of, I suppose, making everybody feel like, yes, I belong in this environment. And we've already talked about early on some of the great interventions we've seen of women-only coaching programs or potentially targeted programs, and in absolutely no way saying stop doing those or that's not a good thing. It is a good thing, and it's part of the solution, but not all of the solution, I think, is what we're really trying to say. So I suppose our question here, and we're going to bring you, Tandy, in to start with, is what could we do within the coach education system that would get us to a point in time where actually it's a coach education system for everybody that doesn't necessarily need extra bits on the top of it?
Whenever I hear that type of question, I sort of go back and think about how learning occurs and how we actually set up that motivational climate. The climate that change needs to happen, and we envisage the behaviours that we showcase whenever we are educating. That we think about even the autonomy of support. Thinking about that self-determination theory, the autonomy, the readiness, the confidence, because that's exactly what we want to happen if we're thinking about the development of the environment to ensure that the learning actually happens. I always think about some of the stuff from the All Blacks in motivation climate, thinking about respect, and I think thinking about target, the responsibility that we have, that we're empowering the learning to happen, that we have that self-direction, that self-reliance, that we take purpose in the people that we are actually working with, that we think about the overall engagement, that we are engaging them in the overall learning process, and so much of the time we don't give time for reflection to happen, to go away during those education times to talk and to peer mentor each other through the process, that we are thinking about where they're coming from, that they are capable and they have good competencies, but how do we develop those competencies that they may be struggling with for their own personal areas of development, and most of all, the trust, that we have trust in one another, and that we have that understanding and trust. But it comes down to that leadership, and I think that's a critical thing. We have to always go back and think, who are the leaders? We all have a leadership role to play when we're thinking about coach education and development of a specific climate. Within that setting, the participants are leaders at points. Think about the style approach we take, and I think time. We have to take time in the learning, and not rush things through, and not sticking to that particular plan. Unfortunately, some coach educators have a plan. Let me tick off all these competencies. Tickety boo, we've done. I think that's a challenge as well. So it's nearly going back and creative, innovative in what and how we do things.
Thanks, Tandy. And I know definitely reading through some of that research, the individualized, personalized approach to coach education came out really strongly. But when Michael and I have been looking at stuff around general principles of modern learning, those things come out. It's not necessarily just actually that would just be better education, wouldn't it?
It would be definitely better education. I think the difficulty we have is, that there's a need to have experiential learning, and to have that active mentor working with you. However, if we look at coach education systems, it's the viewpoint that the mentor has to be at a higher level, and it has to be in that sport for a lot of sports, and it doesn't have to be. If you've got that passionate person who can be that critical friend, that's what a mentor is. It's a critical friend who you can have those discussions with, you can have those particular solutions, help to solutionize, and give you advice when you need that particular advice along the way.
Yeah, no, great. Thanks, Tandy. Lucy, you talked early doors there earlier on about your take on actually there's lots of women involved in coaching, but the qualification step seems to lose lots of them for some reason. What can we do to stop that happening?
So I think there's lots of different things. Sometimes it's how coaching courses are marketed. That the first step is a weekend thing that you have to go to wherever that is. Like, that's immediately a barrier. You think about how much we're now been living in a virtual world, and how people could get involved in starting their coaching learning in a different way, potentially using technology. Where do you market these courses, and what even is a coach? Sometimes that word can be off-putting to people. If the picture on your poster is a man holding a clipboard, so just starting to think about those other unintended things. I think a bit like Tandy was saying, the delivery on the day, if you are going down a course route, how those spaces are facilitated, what happens in the course. There's so much you could do with people who are already doing some kind of helping out, to build their network, to help them feel connected and safe to fail and try, and then to have that personal connection of, do you think you want to take this to the next level? But that's why it's quite hard to do this as a systemic change. It needs everybody, and it needs people in clubs and in communities to be having these conversations with the women around them, to sort of give them that confidence, as well as making sure that the opportunities fit their needs and are well scheduled and thoughtfully timed. So, for example, in England, lots of our venues where we would host coach education courses are not near any public transport. So it's difficult if you haven't got a car. So that's not anything to do with gender, but thinking about what are the unintended consequences of the way we set things up at the moment. Pretty much it's always at a weekend. So if you work shifts or you've got a family, that's an issue. And so it's just having a look at all of it, not just the women in this instance, if that makes sense.
No, it makes perfect sense to me. Elaine, any views around that?
Yeah, just probably reiterating a lot of what Lucy and Tandy said. For the most part, I find coach education very onerous. It's very time consuming, and we know that females in particular are quite time poor. With that, it's also very expensive. And we know that female sports don't have the same level of funding and sponsorship that male sports have. So there are immediate barriers that come into play. The last point, but that is kind of irrelevant of gender, is that to me it's very formal and maybe deaf by competency. A point Tandy made maybe more eloquently, in that it is very reflective of a very bureaucratic system, where it's so much paper and so much, and ultimately coaching is about being with people and getting involved with people. And if we're doing files and paperwork and planners, and then we're probably missing the boat a wee bit. And I know that for me would be off-putting. I don't actually have that many coaching qualifications, on the grounds that I was simply too busy coaching and having babies to complete them. So like Netball Northern Ireland at one point offered for me to go and do my level 3 for 3 weekends in England. It wasn't going to happen. How do you fit that in when you're doing Northern Ireland coaching? And and so on paper, I'm missing quite a bit. To be honest, I didn't want to do it. The bottom line is I didn't want to do the coach education, because I felt every time I was with the players, I would learn more. Like, in order for female sports to do better in the coach education front, they need more sponsorship, and that has to come from a complete equality part from the government funding. There was a thing in the Southern government there last week where the female players get 0.7 million towards their training funds, where the male players are getting 3 million. And that's astonishing in 2020, that there still be so much inequality. And therefore, it has to be more accessible to females. So that is reducing the cost and reducing the time demands.
Thanks, Elaine. Definitely reading through some of that stuff, that was one. It maybe sounds stupid not thinking of it before, but one of the papers had focused on, I think it was maybe football, maybe, and it focused on, well, actually, if a male invests that amount of money, they can move into a club where there's a salary attached, or at least an honorarium or something attached to that post. But actually, female football isn't at a stage where that income's coming through. I just hadn't thought about it from that perspective. So even just as an investment prospect, it's much better investment for a male in that situation than a female. While I know there's loads of males who invest lots into coach education who don't do a voluntary role as well, but it just wasn't one that I'd particularly thought of before. Lucy, if you don't mind, bring you back in again around. I know I could see your head nodding when Elaine was talking around. She's coaching and she's learning on the job coaching. And this isn't necessarily, I suppose, a gender thing, but like, how do we make more of that in coach education, that the time spent learning and learning on the job is recognised more than we probably do so at the minute?
Yeah, so as Elaine was saying earlier, filling in a portfolio isn't coaching. Coaching is on the ground. It's a relationship with people. It's a practical skill. It's and like any practical skills, whether you're learning DIY or learning your sport, you learn by trying it, maybe watching something, having a go, making a mistake, getting some feedback, trying it again. So actually, that we need to find ways where we can assess and reward people based on that practical experience that they have, and seeing them actually doing the job. Like, you wouldn't give somebody a qualification in hairdressing if you didn't get them to cut hair. Like, you wouldn't get them to fill in a book about it. You would get them to do it, and you would work with them when they were in a training salon. And so there's something in the, how do we recognize what the job is? And I think for me, linked to that as well, is that the idea that coaching isn't just about the technical, tactical of your sport, and how do we recognize those qualities as much as anything else? Because we've all seen those coaches who know everything about their sport, but they can't coach because they can't connect with people. And equally, you've seen those coaches who know nothing about the activity that they're doing, but they can captivate the people in front of them just by being who they are. And so I guess this is where it flips into what do we want from coaches? What is a good coach? How would we know it if we saw it? And how would we assess for it? How would we teach it? Well, we'd probably get people to practice a lot. And so we start to get into like radical changing the whole system territory quite quickly.
Yes, no, we've got you, definitely. And it sort of rings true with what Elaine had just said, I think, around coaching's about people, and being with people is definitely aligned to that. Tandy, I can see your head nodding away in the background there when Lucy was talking about. I'm just thinking, you guys, I suppose, at university have tried to put quite a lot of applied practice into the courses there. But I know that you've worked on various governing body awards as well. Can you see how we could do more in that space that would make a difference?
Yeah, I think the key thing is, as Lucy and Elaine both said, it's about the ability to perform on the ground in front of the individuals that you're actually coaching. So it's very context specific. If we're thinking about how some national governing body awards do their coaching and do their assessments, and that word assessment puts first of all puts the poor candidates off. And I hate the word candidate as well, because they are the learner and they are the coach at that particular point in time. If you're doing it in their own environment, they feel a lot more comfortable, because you're simulating exactly what they should be doing. They can't react to what they would normally do if they were in a true coaching setting. And I was actually on a session earlier on today where they were talking about reflection and think aloud for reflection. And I think that's something that I'm starting to think about. How can I start to look at that for me, even for me, whenever I'm delivering my sessions with the participants, or my learners. I'm thinking aloud. Why am I actually doing what I'm doing at that particular point in time? What am I actually visually attending to? What am I thinking about? What am I cognitively thinking about? What decisions have to be made at that point in time? Because coaching isn't easy. It is quite complex. but you have to make a decision for yourself. You know, what do you want to get out of coaching, and how do you want to better yourself? And it is through experience and experiential learning, making the mistakes, learning from those mistakes, and not being frightened to. And I think whenever we go back and think about assessments, and I know I go back to an experience that I had in regards whenever I first came into coaching, and it was the old Northern Ireland Netball Coaching Awards at level 2. God only knows what level is at the moment. And I know that I failed that first time round, and it was a negative upon me, and feeling, you know, I'm just not good enough here. And I think we have to be very, very mindful of that whenever we think about how we look at those particular competencies and say, you're just not yet competent. It's even that language, that discourse we use in coaching can be really have a true negative effect and put them off. So it might be, you know, this is maybe an area for development, and supporting that person through the particular process and giving them an opportunity to try it again and keep trying and keep supporting. And when Elaine was saying about, you know, logbooks and all of those, yes, it's time consuming. I can remember back to the time when we were looking at UKCC during coaching NI times, and looking at it for netball, and the fact, yes, it's going to cost too much. There was a lot of bureaucracy with regards to that. There was a different cohort of committee at that particular point in time who didn't want to lose identity. So if we think about our identity for our particular national governing bodies and having a qualification that is fit for purpose for us, and not trying to take things that may not fit within your context. You know your people, you know what they want, and you know how you can support them. And it's trying to support people and not put people off. So when Elaine said about in terms of the cost, yes, a hell of a lot of costs for coaches to get the coaching qualifications. Some of the high performing coaches that we have, and I'm saying high performing, not high performance, high performing coaches may have very limited coaching qualifications. They've got experiential learning. They know and they adapt to what they see in front of them. And hopefully change will be happening, you know, in an awful lot of the governing bodies, due to, you know, the new structure, and the DNA element that you guys have published, and working with national governing bodies, as you are at the moment, to make the change and effective change, not just for females, but across the board for those, across all of the different target groups we have.
Oh, thanks, Tandy. I think that's something definitely I'm going to hand over to Michael now to take a look at the third barrier, but something that I would really want to revisit within the last one is that person-centered aspect of it.
Yeah, and the third barrier really focuses around recruitment into the coaching workforce. And I think this is a challenge generally, but certainly a challenge for female coaches. And there may be a number of different reasons behind that. It may be a poor recruitment process or potentially no recruitment process. There could be things like, you know, burnout and, you know, increased workload for volunteers, which isn't too appealing. Or the fact that actually we're not going out there recruiting in the right way. And I know, Lucy, this was something that you had discussed in terms of actually making coaching roles more attractive and more appealing. If we were going to start to shift some of the processes around recruitment, how would you go about doing that?
That's a great question. So I was actually talking about it today with a colleague, and it's made me think about how actually we get young girls interested in coaching even younger. So before we even get into recruiting them to be a coach, what are we doing with young leadership, with helping out schools, with helping out younger age groups in clubs, you know, kind of normalizing being part of that setting and helping out for those people who are already in sport. We're also got to think about parent helpers, and how you might get a mum involved might be different to how you might get a dad involved, and what is the role that you're selling and the way that you describe it, and how are you talking to them about what you need from them as a coach would be very different. When you start to think about talent and high performance, where the commitment is getting more in terms of possibly time, it's thinking about being overt with any opportunities for support if you have with childcare or shared jobs that you might be able to offer, and making those things come up front. It's thinking about, again, what is the role that you're asking that person to fulfill, and given what both Elaine and Tandy have said about qualifications, what are your requirements of the job? So, you know, what are the prerequisite qualifications that you need somebody to have? So particularly with tutors in England, you know, historically we've had to ask people to have a very high level sports qualification before we allow them to become a tutor, and actually immediately we're fishing from a very small pool. So it's not surprising that we don't have a diversity in the tutor workforce, because we put this barrier to have this thing which not very many people have, which doesn't necessarily lead to competence in the job. So it would need to be a different solution for different contexts, I suppose. But for me, it's about being really clear on why you want that person to come in and what is the job you're asking them to do, and thinking about being a bit more proactive, because I think we all have the, oh well, it will take the best person when they apply. But yeah, I think I've waffled on, but it might make sense.
No, absolutely, and I think those are really useful, practical ideas of how we can actually instigate some change here. And it's becoming aware to me as we have these conversations that these barriers are quite interlinked. So we might need to you know, address culture in order to address recruitment. We might need to address recruitment before we can address coach education and development, and there's definitely something intertwined in all of them. Elaine, over to you then, just on that thought around recruitment. What interventions can we, or what changes can we make to support a better recruitment process?
You see, Michael, I might struggle to answer that question, and that I do think it's back to female participation, and I am surrounded by strong females and teachers here, coaches, friends. They don't want to coach, and I don't know whether that's systematic in that they grew up never feeling it was an option. So really, if we could wind the clock back 20 years, maybe, like, these are strong, confident women who any club high performance would be delighted to have. I'm talking about even former international athletes. They don't see it as a viable option or choice. Maybe I'm wrong, and I'm maybe taking the women's coaching movement back by saying they don't want to coach. But unless we go back and with the current crop of players, let them have a voice, letting them input, letting them make decisions, just listening to them and building their confidence, empowering them, have them working with children, making it a financial option. I know it certainly is not a financial option for most at the minute, so therefore it can't be viable when there's so many other careers that these bright, intelligent young women can do. So I don't have an answer to tell you how to do it, for winding back the clock or starting from scratch now and really pushing it for the future.
Funny, when you say wind back the clock, would you subscribe to the idea that Lucy just said about challenging females to get involved at a younger age and assuming those leadership roles in some way, because at some point then you potentially get hooked into coaching and you find out the benefits of it and the enjoyment of it?
See, Michael, again, I'm in two camps there. I feel I started coaching too young, to the detriment of my own playing career. And as it vastly decreases in time, I'd be very aware of, oh, I wish I'd started that a wee bit later. You know, so if we want females to get the best out of sport, then we need to let them play when they can play as well. So there's no easy answer to that one, and I'm sorry I can't give a more intelligent input to it. But I just feel it's something we need to do, definitely, as Lucy said, start with the participation, work on the quality, particularly in terms of funding, and then move on to the next bit. I know that in the AFL, the AFLW, and the WNBA, they've started to have all-female backroom teams. I don't necessarily think that's the way forward. You know, it's a matter of shutting the door, and I don't think we should shut doors to anybody. You know, I did always have males in my backroom team, and I'm happy to do so, even in an all-female sport. But I don't have a definite, here's your plan, go for it. Sorry.
And listen, I think it's okay, you know, not to have that answer right now. I think the important thing is that we continue to have the conversation around it, and we continue to ask those questions, because that'll help us develop a better understanding. It'll help us develop more dialogue. And at some point in the future, maybe we can answer that question quite succinctly.
I also, Michael, I also wonder on that, having met some of the players that Elaine has coached on a couple of occasions, and obviously not knowing them that well, but when you go into that environment, Elaine, the environment you were coaching in with the Northern Ireland netball team, as you say, they're girls or they're women who have high commitment careers, and they somehow squeeze international sport or maybe two elite sports for some of them around those. And I wonder sometimes, and again, this isn't a male female thing; it's just in general. Do we sometimes overdo performance athletes being the next coaches versus actually somebody, they actually might be burnt out at that stage. It might be a long time before they want to give that amount of time again, but there might be somebody else, actually same age profile, same gender, same everything else, but just hasn't been completely, every spare moment of their being hasn't been in netball or whatever other sport it has been for a long time. And maybe are there other populations around that? I don't know, Elaine, if you have any views on that from you know those people a lot better than I do.
Well, it's interesting. It was something that England netball did with their current England netball coach, Jess Felby. She was like the 12th player on an England program, and they quickly moved her. This is my reading of the situation, and they coaching quite quickly, and now are reaping the benefits of it. And that she's now the national head coach. Having had plenty of experience from quite a young age. We don't have the player pool to be able to remove them out of that, but definitely with the burnout, if you have given your all, I'd be amazed even that when we go back to watch matches, that to me that all the ex-players aren't there, because to me they should be there in abundance. And but I do feel that there's a definite, they've give so much of themselves while as you say having very busy careers as well, that it's not fallible to keep doing it long term and then go straight into coaching as well. It's too much.
Thank you, Elaine. And over to Tandy then. Tandy, what's your thoughts on recruitment?
Hi, Michael. I was just listening to Elaine there, and I know because there's a couple of the players who have done their coaching qualifications who are senior representative players for netball, and they're absolutely fantastic. They will be brilliant. But yes, they're young. They've got careers, and they're still playing, and they probably will still keep playing for a number of years to come. I think from my perspective, I go back because I've been involved in the Female Sports Forum and the Active Fitness Sporty. That there's a clear 4 pillars there in regards to media role models, the leadership in terms of the workforce, and then in terms of research evaluation. And so there have been programs that have been developed across the 6 partners that did receive funding from the Department of Communities and Sport Northern Ireland. And one of those in regards to when Lucy was talking about, the younger age group, the YST programme that has been rolling out for the last number of years in Northern Ireland, through Amanda Mulgee when she was project manager. The GLAMS project, the Girls Leadership and Marketing, and where they had the opportunity to develop their leadership skills and to do specific programs within their school setting. How that rolls out then with students coming to university, we all know that there's a specific dropout, and this is the I Coach Kids the session on Wednesday. Whenever Catherine Woods Catherine Woods was talking about the dropout rate, but it's not dropout, there's drop in. And so what we're really looking at is making sure that we have participation across the life course, and that individuals are still participating, but also where that route might go. I understand totally, yes, we need to work at a younger age group, and if we're thinking about what happens in PE and the leadership opportunities possibly within PE, and how shift and change can happen, there are the UK Leaders Awards, and how effective and influential they are. I think we have to look and acknowledge that might be the first step in to get the leadership qualifications, those understanding, those skill set, the knowledge understanding, and then going into your sport specific element of it. But it's these key skills are important. If I know from working with the students in the university, because we were lucky enough to get some funding in regards to a leadership program as well through the Active Fitness Sporty. And initially I looked at it as students across the wider university and not specifically the students within the school of sport, because I thought they should have the skill set, they should have the self-confidence, self-esteem to be able to deliver in a sporting setting, because they've come in to do a sports course, and that's not the case. You know, we feel that students who are coming in to do PE, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done with those particular students. And it's interesting whenever you listen to them and whenever you chat to them afterwards, you know, what did you learn from that, what did you gain? And it's just feeling valued. And I think that's what we need to understand about, you know, how we recruit people, and that acknowledge, you know, the small bit that they actually can add to our overall system. And working with them in an effective way is important. There are programs out there. It's how we utilise them in a more effective way. Go back to the Activate Leaders programme that there was for Sport Northern Ireland a number of years ago. And then if you now think about the task finish that's happening within young people, you know, there's a role possibly there in regards to what can happen from your side of the house, you know, from Sport Northern Ireland, making those particular connections across too. That was probably a long-winded, not what the right answer, but that's just my thoughts. But I think it's you know, it's understanding what that leadership role should be. Where do we start? Where do we end? Even if we think back to the Coaching Ireland, and where they accelerate people into the system, into their level 3 qualifications. I'm not sure if they still do that, but you're losing out. So those high performing athletes transitioning straight into to be a high performing coach or a high performance coach, they've lost a lot of that, the knowledge, the skills, understanding, and the how-to skills. So it's making sure that we get things right, and where the gaps are, how you develop that, whether that's through qualifications, through CPD, support networks. But probably a long way to go for a number of national governing bodies still.
Yeah, and I think it's making that recruitment process as effective as possible at any stage. So if you're an ex-athlete coming in to start your coaching career, if you're someone who's quite young and you're trying to get them hooked on coaching quite early, or if it's someone who's never been involved in sport before but actually would be a really useful volunteer or a coach, to try and help them as much as possible, make that seamless, make them feel very welcome, and be very clear about what they're being recruited into.
So we're coming to the towards the back end of it now. Michael's going to ask one question to finish off in a second, but the last factor, and we've talked about this throughout, so I don't think we need to explore it in too much detail. I'm nearly going to ask you for a solution that you might have. One solution that you might have around this is around the personal factor is the last factor, and this tends to be the one that ends up always being the stereotype of this is the issue as opposed to this is one of the issues. So my last question before I hand over to Michael to ask the last question of the podcast is, what one thing as a coaching system could we do that would allow the flex to let the biggest cross section of people come into coaching, where sometimes actually there might be barriers to them at the minute, you know, in terms of whether that's personal circumstances or personal outlook, personal confidence, whatever that happens to be. But what one thing could we do that would make a big difference to start with? So Elaine, I know you're not going to like me for this, but I'm going to come to you first.
It's a difficult one. You know, people don't want to say the lack of confidence, but it is a big issue, and I don't think there's any harm in addressing it. That said, you know, we can say it's not just a female issue. If it's females have the issue with the confidence, then it's time to us to grab the bull by the horns and either work at getting their confidence increased. Maybe start those that are able and confident. State it. I'm really good at what I do, and that's okay to say it, because men have no difficulty in telling us how wonderful they are a lot of the time. I have a situation when I take our males and females for netball in class, and if a boy scores 2 and misses 10, he tells me he was on fire. If a girl scores 10 and misses 2, she asks me not to play her and shoot her the following week. You know, and I have made it my life ambition to reduce male confidence on our students while increasing the female. And it is the issue. It is the issue, along with funding and sponsorship. And until those things are addressed, we're not going to get anywhere. And that's why any female that is in public forum should be able to say, yep, I'm good at that. I did that. You know, that was me. That was my achievement. And we're just not there yet. And hopefully females have to take responsibility, build up other females, empower the next generation of females. It's our issue. It is a female issue. So let's do it.
Hey, thanks, Elaine. Lucy, one thing that you would change to address any one of those issues?
I love that answer. That I don't know how to follow that. I think the thing for me would be to see coaches as participants. You know, like we would see the players or the participants. Like if we stop seeing them as a piece of equipment or like we would a sports hall, like understand that they are people who are participating. They're just participating in a different way than the whole way that we would approach them would shift. You know, like you just take a different approach to everything. So if we could see the coaching as a way of participating in sport that just isn't running about, that might change the way that we do stuff.
Definitely, that's a really interesting thought. I have not looked at it that way before. Brilliant, thank you, Lucy. And Tandy?
I did laugh whenever Elaine said that about the egos. I know there's plenty of egos in our place as well, and that's not just students, it's members of staff as well, in terms of males and females. But that's digressing. In terms of thinking about this question, I think it's about the effectiveness of communities of practice. I think we have to consider that. We need to take that collective action together. As a voice, you know, if we think about what has happened over the last number of years, you know, we are taking action, we are taking collective action, we are working together to make that effective change. And to think about the challenge, build and share. I think we need to share with one another the good things, the bad things, to make sure that what we do has a future and what the future actually might look like for those within the sporting context across Northern Ireland, whatever that might look like. You know, the fact that there has been such change because of the situation we're in terms of COVID now, you know, we've had to learn to adapt and to what we can do, what we can't do at the moment. But being connected, and most importantly, that anybody who's involved in the system, that they actually feel cared for. And that's critical. I think that's critical, that we empower everybody, that they do feel cared for, that they have collective action, and they look forward to a positive future in sport, whatever sport and the level that they compete or coach at or whatever.
Brilliant, love that. Michael?
Last question, guys, of the afternoon. You'll probably be glad to hear, or maybe not glad. Maybe you could stay on for another hour. And it's really from Lucy's blog. And one of the quotes from that blog was, cumulatively, small decisions, choices, actions make a very big difference. And to finish off, I'd like to ask you, what small decision, choice, or action are you going to take into 2021? So nearly like a bit of a New Year's resolution type question here. What decision, action, choice are you going to take into 2021 that will help make a beneficial change in women in coaching? First question, I think, for Tandy.
Thanks very much, Michael. I was just contending there with being a mummy of 3 as well, children coming in at the same time. Whenever I'm thinking of this, is to acknowledge that we are all different, that we need to consider our own self-care. I think that's important. I always go back to some of the bits I've been doing in terms of leaning into the rumbles and learning from those particular rumbles. Not to be afraid to challenge yourself, and to think about everything we do as an experience and that experience trigger, to reflect upon those, to acknowledge those, and for me to think about what change can I make, but also what change can other people make upon me, because you know I'm still learning. I have to be open to the learning that needs to happen to make sure that what I do is effective in practice. And to acknowledge that sometimes we make mistakes and we're all on our very own, very personal journey. There is a vision. What that vision is, still I won't know until 2021, until we see exactly what we can do, what we can't do. especially in the environment that we're actually in regards to being able to teach and deliver to our students in an effective and efficient way.
Tandy, thank you. Very, very apt point. Elaine?
So I work with a young female demographic, and many of them do lack confidence. So with the benefit of this podcast and actually reading more about female coaches, I'm going to spend time trying to empower them and letting them see that it is a viable option for hopefully a career as well. In terms of, I would actually say that our male students have actually become quite enlightened in terms of how they view females and female sport and the female voice, but our females aren't recognizing the value that they have yet, and so it's on them now to maybe acknowledge it. In terms of small change, I'm going to change my leadership assignment to reflect more of a female point of view. The other thing that we had planned to do within our club was that there was some funding for camps. Now, one of the things that we're looking for was culture, and I think building female sports culture is actually a really viable and good way in terms of the whole girl power, and particularly with young girls. So we're going to really push this through and try and get the money to run that this year to build the next generation of young female coaches.
Fantastic, Elaine. Thank you. And finally, Lucy?
Yeah, so mine wouldn't be dissimilar to what Elaine was saying, really, about not just mentoring younger girls, but sponsoring, giving people opportunities when they come up and giving them the nudges to go for things. I want to be more proactive in doing that, particularly for girls who are different to me or have come from a different background to me. And I want to do that more proactively. And the other thing is recruiting an army of male allies on this charge, like you two. So keep rounding up the blokes who can help us, because we need you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Lucy. And that is one thing that Simon and myself have talked about, that in terms of the podcasts and the webinars that we deliver, we really want to get the fantastic female coaches and coach developers that are currently out there doing a fantastic job for the coaches and the participants and the athletes out there in the sporting system. And I think it's really important to recognise that and can continue to offer the opportunity to have a really diverse approach to how we do things. So, guys, thank you very much to all three of you for contributing to a really important topic. It was fantastic to hear your thoughts and your opinions and your experiences. For all the listeners, this is our last episode of 2020. We hope you've enjoyed it so far. We will be continuing to bring you other episodes in 2021. Guys, thank you very much.
So, Michael, really, really enjoyable conversation with Elaine, Tandy and Lucy. What are the thoughts that hit you afterwards?
So much. I mean, the conversation went a number of different ways there, and I thought it was all really important points in relation to the females in coaching. The first one that really struck with me was around coach education and coach development, and how we potentially need to make any coach development or coach education programs more accessible, more appealing, more purposeful in order to attract female coaches and make them feel welcome and secure in that environment. And while female-only coach development programs are really important and really useful at times, we also need to look at the wider coach education offer to ensure that the females are given a fantastic opportunity to engage. The second one was really around how we recruit females into coaching roles. So basically, our current practices in relation to recruitment, as effective as they could be, and they're probably not, based on the discussions that we had, and all three of our guests were able to come up with some really useful and innovative ideas of actually how we can challenge recruitment at this point.
Yeah, I think for me, I agree with the points that you've made there, and people, I think, being a real key theme, and people-centered. I know we've both got a daughter and we've both got a son, and as things stand, my Abby and your Lucy are much less likely to coach in sport than my Josh and your Rudy, and that can't be the right thing to do. So I suppose we've got a responsibility professionally, but also personally, to that not be the case by the time that they're of an age where you might start coaching. And for me, as I say, it was the people-centered points were the big bits for me. So Tandy spoke about creating a sense of belonging, feeling like you should be there, and creating environments where coaches, all coaches, and in the context of this conversation, female coaches feel like they should be there, whether that's where they're deployed or whether that's where the education happens or whatever it happens. We need to take steps to make sure that happens. Elaine talked about coaching being about people, about being around people, how you interact with people, how you inspire people. And that definitely struck a chord with me. And I think Lucy summarized all of that really nicely when she said about seeing coaches as participants, because we know if we look at participants, we'll look at their wants and their needs, and we'll try and create an experience around them that hits both of those things. And I'm not sure that we always do that for coaches. So that's probably the big thing for me, sort of summarizing all three of those points, is taking away that how can we create a situation where it is around the wants and needs of coaches, and we help them develop there rather than maybe from absolute fixed curriculums of here you need to get this stuff. So give them what they need.
Fantastic. And as always, three fantastic guests who really give us a lot to think about from that episode. As mentioned, this is our last episode of 2020. Moving into 2021, you'll definitely hear more of the Curious Coaching podcast. We hope you've enjoyed listening to this episode and all the episodes we've delivered so far. Have a wonderful festive period, and we'll look forward to speaking with
Curious
you
Coaching is brought to you by Sport Northern Ireland. We hope that this episode has sparked some curiosity for you and your coaching. The future belongs to the curious.